Good morning, good evening, good afternoon to some. Thank you, Dr. Boesak, for being with us today. I am Garbo Hearn. I am the director of Pyramid Art Books and Custom Framing at Hearn Fine Art. We're located in the Dunbar community in the heart of Little Rock, the oldest Black neighborhood in Arkansas. And we are excited to be a platform for local, regional, national, and international authors and artists. So this morning, we are excited to have Dr. Allan Boesak with us, and our moderator this morning will be Reverend Wendell Griffen, a Fifth Circuit Court judge and pastor of New Millennium Church. And we're excited to have this conversation with both of you, and thank you for helping us this morning, Reverend Griffen. So take it away.
Thank you, Sister Garbo, and thank you and Pyramid and Hearn Fine Art for being our host this morning of this Zoom book talk, our second book talk that we've had co-sponsored with Pyramid, we at New Millennium Church. We're just so glad for the collaboration, glad to have this opportunity. My name is Wendell Griffen. I'm pastor of New Millennium Church here in Little Rock, Arkansas, and I am simply delighted to welcome you to this book talk with my friend and mentor, the Reverend Dr. Allan Aubrey Boesak, concerning his 2011 book dedicated to Reverend Dr. Jeremiah Wright, titled Selfless Revolutionaries, Biko, Black Consciousness, Black Theology, and a Global Ethic of Solidarity and Resistance. Let me give you a quick introduction, quick only because I want to give the most time to Dr. Boesak, not because he does not warrant a longer introduction. Allan Aubrey Boesak is, in my view, the leading liberation theologian in the world. After James Cone joined the ex-ancestors, I think that Allan Boesak would be considered if probably the most well-written liberation theologian across the world. He's originally from Caracas, South Africa. He became active in the colored branch of the Dutch Reformed Church as a pastor. He became known as a liberation theologian, starting with the publication of his doctoral dissertation titled Farewell to Innocence in 1976. He was elected as president of the World Alliance of Reformed Churches in 1982. And while in that position, he led that tradition to declare apartheid a heresy against the gospel of Jesus. He rose to prominence during the 1980s as an outspoken critic and opponent of the National Party's policies and played a major anti-apartheid activist role as a patron of the United Democratic Front, the UDF, from 1983 to 1991. He was elected chairman of the Western Cape region of the African National Congress in 1991. In 2004, and I mentioned this intentionally because Dr. Boesak was ahead of the game again. In 2004, Dr. Boesak came out in favor of same-sex marriage in South Africa a year before the country's constitutional court declared that the denial of marriage to gay people was discriminatory and violated the country's constitution. In 2008, while serving as moderator of the Cape Synod of the United Reforming Churches in Southern Africa, he announced he was going to resign all of his positions within the church because of his discriminatory positions on homosexuality and gay and lesbian people. He invoked the 1986 Belhar Confession, which lambasts all forms of discrimination, to say that the church should welcome gays and lesbians, begin to perform gay marriage ceremonies, and appoint gay clergy. In 2008, Dr. Boesak challenged the South African leadership to remember why the country is set out to join all races and create a non-racial South Africa. He has been a very strong social critic of the neo-capitalist policies of the post-Mandela region, not because he did not love Nelson Mandela. He loved Nelson Mandela, but he was forthright in his criticism of Nelson Mandela, and he was also forthright in his observations about the Truth and Reconciliation process in South Africa that he has honestly said was short on truth and therefore short on reconciliation. Allan Boesak has been my friend since 2013. I consider him a brother beloved. He's a mentor. He prods me. He makes me think. He makes me realize how big the truth is and how deep it is and how much more we have to know and grow. And it is a joy to welcome him to this Zoom. He has preached at New Millennium Church. He's lectured at New Millennium Church. He's preached and lectured around the world. And it's just a joy to have him here. And to also, let me give a moment of personal privilege, say hello to his beloved Elna, who I know is watching this Zoom, and their daughters, Sarah and Andrea. Dr. Boesak, with that as an insufficient introduction, good day to you, brother. I know it's evening time where you are. You have to unmute. There you go.
Oh, hang on.
You're good.
No. There you go. Thank you so much, Josh Griffen, Ms. Hearn, everybody. It is so good to be back in the circles of New Millennium Church and the people connected to that crowd of people who are so dedicated to the questions of justice and freedom and dignity. It is a great privilege and a pleasure for me to join you tonight in this book talk. Wendell Griffen is a blessing to me and my family, has been since we met in 2013. And I thank God every day for our friendship and for his love and his courage and his support and his example as a prophetic truth teller in our world today. I am very, very happy to share this time with you. I have been asked to talk a little bit about this book, Selfless Revolutionaries. The book came about at a time of, let me say, a conflagration, because it's not just a conversion. There was actually a chaotic coming together of all sorts of circumstances and crises in what I would call here in South Africa the post-Mandela trauma, and what one could call in the United States the post-Obama trauma. I'm thinking of the issues that rose up in our societies, the fact that the prophetic church in South Africa, and I speak in this book and elsewhere, always of the prophetic church in distinction to the institutional church. And that prophetic church is what Martin Luther King called the true ecclesia and the hope of the world, and that my friend here in South Africa, Dr. Charles Villavicencio, called that church that serves as a restless presence in the church and in society. So that prophetic church that had taken such a wonderful lead in the struggle against apartheid, especially during the 1970s and the 1980s, when the ANC came to power in 1994, it was as if that church had completely lost its prophetic voice, its prophetic calling, its prophetic presence. And there might be reasons for that, but clearly that prophetic church in South Africa stepped away from its calling. And it is almost as if we thought that with the coming of Mandela and the African National Congress, it was akin to the coming of the kingdom of God, that the church had done its part, that everything would be fine from now on, because after all, it was our people that we elected. They were in exile because they had struggled for us. They were in prison. Mandela was in Robben Island for 27 years. That's a tremendous sacrifice together with other people. And so when they came back as a result of the amazing sacrifices of our people over decades, but especially of the younger generation since 1976, with the beginning of the Soweto Revolution, that spilled over into the 1980s when we formed the United Democratic Front, that became that last push against apartheid and actually broke the back of that evil system. And so when we could finally meet Mandela, look at him, look at the people whose names we knew and whose history we knew as the African National Congress since 1912, when the organization came into being to fight colonialism in South Africa. It was such an overwhelming thing that everybody, I think, almost in the churches thought our job is now done. Well, we found out that was not so. And to put it quite bluntly and succinctly, a black face in power does not guarantee justice and freedom for our people. That we found out as a very painful experience, but that was the trauma of the post-Mandela. And I'm talking about post-Mandela, I'm talking about the post-euphoric time built around Mandela, this almost deified personality since the early 1990s. In the United States, we saw, especially after the death of Trayvon Martin and the beginning of the Black Lives Matter movement, here in South Africa, our understanding and our disillusionment with the policies of the African National Congress, even when Mandela was still president, we began to discover that the agenda of the government of the African National Congress was not the agenda of the liberation movement for so many years, and neither was it the agenda of the people on the ground who fought so hard for those final decades to get rid of apartheid as a system. So that disillusionment, that disappointment, that sense of betrayal caused a crisis in the heart of people. I look back and I say to people, for activists like myself, if I think of how I thought of the ANC and what we knew of the ANC in the stories that our elders would be telling, in what the ANC's history represented, the oldest liberation movement in South Africa. And when I met some of the older generation, Mandela, Walter Sisulu, Ahmed Kathrada, Govan Mbeki, Thabo Mbeki's father, Mama Sisulu, but I mean, I've worked so closely with Winnie Mandela. So the image that we had in our minds of the African National Congress was a totally different image. The African National Congress that came back from exile and out of prison, that was such a different organization with such different views, so alienated from what we thought, that people like myself still really cannot get over that traumatic experience of what this ANC actually became and what this ANC was doing in government with the power that the people had entrusted to them. So that's the trauma that I'm talking about. And so we saw certain things. We saw the corruption beginning to make itself clear in that absolutely corrupted arms deal of 1997, 1998, with Mandela in charge. We saw the choices that the ANC made, economic policies that were totally rooted in neoliberal capitalism, embracing the old apartheid capitalist structures and systems and ways of doing, and thereby entrenching all of those generational inequalities that we've seen building up over 350 years. As a friend of mine in the United States, Jim Lawson talks about America's plantation economy, which in many ways still works that way. Our apartheid economy equals your plantation economy. And the ANC embraced that with no critical thought. Those of us who came out of the new and younger generation and tried to introduce some other ways of thinking about economic policy. I come from the Black Consciousness movement, which is what this book is all about. And in the Black Consciousness movement, we talked about South Africa's future as a social democracy. So a socialist country, democratically run, egalitarian, not just equal, but egalitarian. And that would find its expression in all sorts of ways. That conversation actually never took place. The ANC closed the door to all such conversations. So we began to see the consequences of the choices that they made economically and socially and politically. And it ended up in a reconciliation process that was in fact the result of secret talks that were held between the leadership of the African National Congress and the leadership of the old apartheid regime. So it was an elite pact, and they were going to look after one another. And the old white capitalist class said to the new ANC leadership, if you join us in embracing new liberal capitalism, you leave the economic system as it is. It also meant that they would leave economic power in the hands of white people, whilst we played around with the political power that we got at the polls. So we were in government, but we were in fact not ruling the country, if you see what I mean. And the payoff would be that a small group of people would be allowed to step into the old capitalist structures and systems. The white people would allow them that. And so they created within a very, very short time, a number of multi-millionaires, black multi-millionaires. And it's a process that the ANC called the deracialization of the economy. But in fact, it was simply opening up a small window for a few blacks to get into and closing that window and closing every door for the vast majority of our people. That had devastating effect on our people. I will come back to this, but Steve Biko actually in the early 1970s warned us against that. He said, if that should happen, and we would not change fundamentally the economic systems and structures of South Africa, then he would say there would be a few blacks who would be allowed into the new bourgeoisie, as he called it, but he said it would be as if the country was still living in yesterday. And that expression has become a chapter in this book. So by 2012, we had the massacre at the Marikana mine way up in the north, where 34 miners were shot dead, virtually at the command of Cyril Ramaphosa, who is now today the president of South Africa. And that was because they would not even give in to the very modest demand of those platinum miners in terms of better working conditions, better benefits, better pay, better housing, and things like that. And Cyril Ramaphosa said to the Minister of Police, just treat them like a bunch of criminals. And she did. And they killed 34 miners within a few minutes. That massacre, which is basically the same as the 1960 Sharpeville massacre, perpetrated by the apartheid regime, took the last scales of our eyes. And we could see that this government that is supposed to be our liberation movement is actually as murderous, as clearly lacking of compassion and solidarity as was the apartheid government. Those are the shocks that we had to deal with. On your side, it was Trayvon Martin. It was an unbelievable police brutality. It was the Black Lives Matter movement. On this side, it was the roads must fall and the fees must fall movement of our young people from the campuses in South Africa. There was a revolution in the air for those years. And one of the curious things that happened was that while I was teaching in the United States, I was invited to go to Ferguson, which I did. And it was one of the most meaningful weekends in my life, because I arrived there on the Friday. I was met by young people. I met first with young people on the Friday afternoon and the Friday evening. I met on the Saturday morning with community organizations that were all involved in the Black Lives Matter movement in Ferguson. On Saturday afternoon, I met the small group of clergy who had the courage to join the young people in the streets, not just going there in order to be on hand to pay bail, because that's always been a litmus test for us. Do we as clergy join the struggle? Simply when everything is over, the clashes are over, the confrontations are over, the police have done what they wanted to do, the young people are in prison, and all we come to do is we line up the lawyers and we get some money and we pay some bail money. No, the young people told us that's not what we want. We want you to stand with us, be in front of the lines with us, smell the tear gas with us, face the guns and the dogs with us. That's where the church, that's what a prophetic church does. And I found those small group of clergy in Ferguson, and it was as if I was talking to my colleagues way back in the 1970s and the 1980s again. It made me see once again, although I've known that for a very long time, the similarities between the struggles of our people in the United States and our people in South Africa. But one of the things that struck me was when the young people said to me, sit down and talk with us. Tell us, what did you guys do in the 1970s through the United Democratic Front? And how did you make apartheid go away? How did you make it fall, that government? And so I found myself talking about Black consciousness, about our experiences, and I found the curiosity of the young people, I found encouraging. When I came home, I found the same thing. Younger people who were in what we call here the Selfless Revolutions and movements. The young people invited me to the University of the Western Cape, and I first understood it was only going to be a small group of postgraduate students in the Faculty of Religion and Theology. And when I got there, I found that the hall or the classroom where we were in was too small. They didn't change the venue, but there were young people standing against the walls, and it was packed, and we had to open the doors so that there were a little bit of room for people who were standing in the hallway, that they could hear what was going on. That struck me. Then I got an invitation from the University of the Free State, traditionally a very white, very Afrikaner, very conservative university. Again, from the younger colleagues in the Faculty of Theology at that university. Come and talk to us about Black theology and Black consciousness. I got there. It was supposed to be 2 hours with the theology students. But word spread, word got around. I got there and they had to move from their original venue to the large hall of the university to accommodate everybody from all over the campus who wanted to come and hear. So I understood there was something bubbling here under the surface. Why this interest in Biko and Black consciousness and Black theology? And so I began my conversations with young people. And so these experiences led me to say, why don't I go back and reread very closely the one book that they put together from the writings and the speeches of Steve Biko called I Write What I Like. And Selfless Revolutionaries is a very close reading, as close as I could get, of that book and of the thinking of Steve Biko, trying to find out what was it that made Black consciousness and Black theology so incredibly relevant in the 1970s and the 1980s. And what is it now that young people feel Black theology and Black consciousness are again powerfully relevant in this situation 30, 40, almost 50 years later? And so that's how this book was born. I tested as I went along. The different chapters have all been in some form discussed with people, lectures here and there, and so forth. And the feedback I took very, very seriously. And all of that is worked into what today is Selfless Revolutionaries. The key concepts in that book, of course, is the concept of selfless revolutionary. Biko talks about revolutionaries that are necessary, but he also talks about selfless revolutionaries, and he makes a difference between the two. And I try to find out what that difference might be in his thinking and in my thinking, and what we are seeing unfolding in front of our eyes today. The other concept that you will find in there is a concept that I call manufactured contentment. And that has to do with our truth and reconciliation process. And what I have increasingly come to see what went wrong with that process, and why that process has come to a virtual standstill. It has stultified why so many of the young people today reject that process, want nothing to do with reconciliation. And to raise the question as a Christian, as a pastor, as a theologian, but also as one who understands a little bit how political processes work. If you throw away reconciliation, what have you got then? I've always thought, and I have written, that a revolution that does not make room for genuine reconciliation is an incomplete revolution. You will find the term incomplete revolution returning in this book. I talk about revolution, not in the old sense of the Russian Revolution or the French Revolution, where there is one cataclysmic moment of violence and one class is overthrown and its place is taken by another class. So the nobility overthrown by the proletariat, and you form a new kind of society out of that violent conflagration of things. I see revolution more in a different way. There's an Iranian scholar by the name of Hamid Dabashi, who talks about revolution as not this cataclysmic moment, but a slower unfolding process. He says it's an open work, and it may seem as if that revolution may be suppressed because the pushback from the imperialist forces and from those in the ruling and dominant classes is always very, very harsh, very hard, very consistent, and very, very violent. And so it looks as if sometimes the revolution is suppressed, but it might be suppressed, but it never dies. And the embers keep on glowing and glowing until another spark comes. And so what happened in 1960, for instance, in the 1950s, with our Defiance campaign, I see the sparks and the embers of that revolution returning in the 1970s and getting even more intense in the 1980s. And you see this in the so-called Arab and North African Spring that flared up in 2011, harshly suppressed in all of those countries. But look what is happening right now. The government of Sudan thought that they had finished those young people then when they came down so hard and the army tried to crush every single form of dissent. And look what is happening in Sudan today. And look at the amazing courage and bravery of those young people. Same is true for Tunisia. Same is true for Algeria. Egypt may be still under the heel of El-Sisi right now, but I am willing to bet that that revolution will also find a new spark. And so look at Black Lives Matter. After Trayvon Martin and the coming of Obama, it seems as if things were sort of calming down, and still under the reign of Obama, that thing flared up again. There is something in the revolution. Martin Luther King talked about a fire that no water can put out. That expression you will also find in this book, as you will find that my conversation is not only with Steve Biko, my conversation is also with Martin Luther King Jr., as it is with James Baldwin. I have always, and I'm saying it again because I said it in the beginning, I've always firmly believed that the connectivity historically, theologically, religiously, and in every single way between our people here and our people in the United States, it's what make this world revolution that would give it life. And there is, for me, no surprise in the fact that it is the Black Lives Matter revolution in the United States that set the flame afire in the revolution of the young people in just about every place in the world, in Europe, in countries like Holland and in France, even in Italy, all those places, in Belgium. I talk about that in the book. And so it seems to me that network that Martin Luther King was talking about, of mutuality, that garment that we are woven into all together. All of the people in the world, the oppressed, look what is happening in Thailand, and look what is happening in Myanmar. I stand in awe and in admiration, and it all is because the Black Lives Matter movement and the Soweto Revolution kids refused to give up. And what has encouraged and fired us up then, now 30 years and 40 years later, is what is firing us up again. And so the book is about the meaning of Black consciousness then, why it is so powerfully relevant now, what can we learn from Black consciousness in building not our own little revolutions here and there, disconnected from one another, but one huge world revolution that I also talk about in the book, coming together and building a global ethic of solidarity and resistance. And so those are, for me, the issues in the book that I thought about, and that I now find that people are interested in and want to hear and want to talk about. It is a book also that is very critical of ourselves, because Black consciousness is a critical consciousness. I say that in the book, but it is also a self-critical consciousness. And without that, you don't have a proper revolution. You may have something that people say is revolutionary, but it isn't. And so that self-critical element is important as we look at ourselves and our role in the world and what is our historic responsibility right now. And it doesn't matter to me who is in government, how much they look like us. There's a book that I wrote before Selfless in 2017 called Pharaohs on Both Sides of the Blood Red Waters. And I work with the theme that we have left Egypt, we have crossed our Red Sea, we are now on the other side of the Red Sea, but we now are facing a different Pharaoh, but it's a Pharaoh that looks like us. The struggle in that sense never ends, because the question is not who is in power and what they look like in power, but what they do with that power. Do they serve justice and freedom and dignity? Are they servants of the people? Do they deserve the trust of the people? And it is our sacred duty to rise up in solidarity with those who are most vulnerable, most oppressed. It's our sacred duty to rise up in resistance against those powers who abuse the trust and the faith of the people and who spit in the faces of the people and who trample upon the sacrifices of the people. Those are, for me, the unforgivable sins in politics. And that's where the prophetic church must be. That's where Black liberation theology must be. And if we are not that, then we cannot call ourselves liberation. We cannot call ourselves Black. We cannot call ourselves revolutionary. We cannot call ourselves a theology. And so that's what the book is trying to say. But the book ends, I hope, with a very hopeful note. And let me just say this about that hope. I am sick and tired of politicians who use the word hope in some vague, superficial, optimistic term, like politicians always do. For me, hope is what I learned from African church father Augustine, who said, hope is a mother with two daughters, and their names are anger and courage. The anger about the way things are in the world, and the courage to go out and do something about that. And so that is what I hope this book will take as a message into the hearts of people, into the minds of people, and into our actions in the world. Thank you, Judge Griffen. I think I have spoken enough. Let's have some conversation.
You know, I could listen to you talk all day, Doc, but and you, as usual, just open all kinds of daylight into this whole notion of Black consciousness, what it means to have revolution, this distinction between complete and incomplete revolution, this notion of pharaohs on both sides of the waters, people who can be pharaohs who look like us, who have the power but do not use the power for liberation purposes. I can listen to you talk about that all day, but in the spirit of making this a book talk, a conversation, let me offer a couple of questions, and then I'm going to kick it to Anna to invite questions from the people who are on the Zoom. And let me tell the people on the Zoom, you can send your questions to Anna by chat or otherwise, but Anna will be minding the chat to look for questions and will be the person who screens our questions. First question, Dr. Boesak. You used in Selfless Revolutionaries the term manufactured consent, which you borrowed from Noam Chomsky. And you extrapolated from that this term you mentioned, manufactured contentment. I want you to talk about how manufactured consent and manufactured contentment have operated to hinder Black consciousness, especially concerning Black religious thought and resistance against white supremacy and white religious hegemony. Can you do that for us, please?
Yes, sir. Thank you for that question. Manufactured consent is a term used by Noam Chomsky and Edward Herman in that book that has now become a classic with the same title. And they talk about that the consent of the public in what government is doing or what the powers in our societies are doing. That is a consent that is manufactured because the media, they were talking about the media act as a propaganda channel for the ruling classes. And so the dominant narrative that are to the benefit of those in power, that is what the media do all day long. And there is probably no better example than to look at the media in the United States and the way they serve the interests of the rich and the powerful and the military industrial, you now have to say the military industrial congressional and media complex. I mean, the many times I have read while I was in the United States, when Obama dropped his first, no, he didn't send it, but he had used his first drone. They called him, that was a presidential moment. They did the same with Clinton. They did the same with Trump. Trump was despised, but he all of a sudden became a president when he dropped that mother of all bombs on Syria. And that is their propaganda. War is good. War is good. America is exceptional. America is number one. All those lies about the United States. I found and they will never tell you the truth. I found a quote which I used in Pharaohs on both sides. It's a quote from an early work of B.H. Lawrence, the novelist from Britain. And he talked about the essential American soul, he says, is hard, isolate, stoic, and a killer. It has never melted. Now, when you think, I came about that quote when I was thinking about what was happening in the United States and the reason why Black Lives Matter rose so majestically against the brutality of American society. There is a deadliness in America. It has always been there from the very beginning that they invaded that country and they stole the land and they enacted genocide towards the Native American people. And it's the same thing here with the invasion of our countries by all those Christians from Europe, and the genocide of the indigenous peoples here, the Khoi and the San, and the absolute shameless brutality. And you can also see that in the way in which as soon as Black Lives Matter becomes something that they cannot any longer ignore, and they see how all of the institutions of society is not just a backlash or a white lash. It is almost a deliberate punishment. You dare stand up against us, we will show you, we will kill you even more than we did before. And what happened this week is a classic example. We will never allow to happen again what happened in Minnesota. That scene will never repeat itself. And so it's that coldness, it's that hardness, it's that heart of violence that the media displays in the way it serves the dominant. And so and they want to manufacture that concept. I talk about manufactured contentment, especially with regard to our truth and reconciliation process, because I look at the way now in which it was put together. I mean, you got Nelson Mandela, who is this icon, who goes to Desmond Tutu, who is this other icon. In our culture, we both call them Tata, Baba, Father, so we honor them. And these two come together, and Desmond Tutu becomes the chairperson, but he never speaks a word of politics. The politicians take their cue from him, and when they speak about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, you could almost think, oh, we're listening to preachers here. I cite examples in the book. But Desmond Tutu came to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and he brought with him that Christian era. He became the father confessor of the nation. They lit candles, they said prayers. It was supposed to be a very secular thing enacted by an act of parliament. Desmond Tutu didn't worry about that, not because there was some evil design in his mind, but that is simply who he is. He cannot be anything else but that. But that's how politics took that. And I always ask the question, how is it that our people saw there is no justice here? There is no remorse here. There is no repentance here. There is no repair here. There is no restoration here, not of dignity, not of social justice, not of history, nothing. But our people were so content for the first few years with this process. That is a manufactured contentment, not so much through the media, but if Desmond Tutu's speech is so much harder to gainsay him. When Mandela speaks about reconciliation, it's Mandela who sat in prison for us for 27 years. So when they speak, they manufacture a contentment that we don't feel. That is why it is not lasting. I speak to young people today who say to me, I want nothing to do with this reconciliation. This reconciliation is false. This reconciliation is fake. They go so far, quite openly, as to say Tutu and Mandela are sellouts. Don't talk to us about them. Those are shocking things to hear. And I try to understand why is it? It's because the contentment was not the contentment. There is a contentment that comes because of the fulfillment of the demands of justice. That contentment, South Africa's people never got. We got a contentment that was manufactured, that was not real, that was fed to us as if it was the bread of life, that we drank as if it was the water of life, and it was poisoned water that we drank. It was foul food that they had given us, and the young people are vomiting it up today in their anger and in their disillusionment and in their resistance to even the word reconciliation. They don't want to hear forgiveness. And so that is a dilemma that we have. And that comes from when you manufacture a contentment with something that had to be something different. And we did not face the truth. We did not really do what we should have done. South Africa's past was never really the conversation. We were not honest about the racism of the past. We were not honest about what the ANC was doing with the National Party. Now it all comes out in the open. And that's why it is so angry. It is so bitter. It is so full of a sense of fundamental betrayal. And that's what I mean. And so we have to now go back and say to each other, can we take this manufactured contentment and replace it with a genuine contentment, which is the contentment that comes after the doing of justice and the restoration of dignity.
Dr. Boesak, and let me do a promo while you support. We thank everybody for viewing this Zoom, this book talk with Dr. Allan Boesak. My name is Wendell Griffen. I'm pastor of Millennium Church, and Dr. Allan Boesak is our guest this morning, this day, talking about his 2021 book, Selfless Revolutionaries. This wonderful book, this subtitled Biko, Black Consciousness, Black Theology, and a Global Ethic of Solidarity and Resistance, dedicated to his good friend and our mentor, Dr. Jeremiah Wright, and dedicated to him in time for his 80th birthday. Dr. Boesak, thank you for writing this book and for dedicating it to Dr. Wright. My second question to you is, and before I ask the question, let me remind people to send your questions to the chat. Put your question to Dr. Allan Boesak to the chat, and Sister Anna Hearn will check this. Sister Anna, please make sure we're recording this while we're doing this, please. Second question, Dr. Boesak, how can we infuse Black people with Steve Biko's sense of Black consciousness, solidarity, and resistance when people are mesmerized by what I call the cult of personality, surrounding figures such as Nelson Mandela or Barack Obama, or now Kamala Harris, or I'm going to get in trouble now. I'll call the name James Clyburn, who's just days ago, held up because he correctly counted all the votes needed for the Build Back Better social network program that President Biden has pushed through and passed the House yesterday. How can we infuse Black people with Biko's sense of Black consciousness? and solidarity and resistance when folks are mesmerized with these cult of personality. And I will add in the religious category, mesmerized with people such as T.D. Jakes.
Yeah. Well, thank you again for that question, Judge Griffen. I mentioned a short while ago that when I speak of Black consciousness, I speak of Black consciousness as a critical consciousness, as a self-critical consciousness, as a liberating consciousness, as an engaging consciousness, and as a humanizing consciousness. Because that's what we learned in the Black consciousness philosophy. And it helped us tremendously because you're not only critical of what Black consciousness called the white power structure, the system built to benefit imperialism and colonialism and white supremacy and serve the ends of white supremacy, and thereby affirm every single day Black inferiority and Black worthlessness in every facet of life. So you are critical of that system. But Steve Biko said, you got to look at yourself. Why is it that we have even allowed white people to do this to us? And so there's a long quote in the book where he describes the Black person who is humiliated by whites every single day, who is oppressed and who is angry about that and frustrated. But he dare not raise his anger and his frustration in the face of white people. So he bottles it up inside him. And then Biko says he goes into his toilet and he screams at himself in the toilet. But the moment he comes out, he nods his head and he folds his hands before the white man. And he says that, and he talks about Black people as he says, we are like a sheep. He says, we are like an ox. We don't think for ourselves. We have thrown away the dignity that we should have had and held on to. So that was hard to hear. Think about this. Now, he says this to a people who have been oppressed for 350 years. He says this to people suffering under the worst humiliation that you can think of. Apartheid was described as a crime against humanity with good reason. And our land was stolen, our dignity was stolen, we were enslaved, our children were sold, like in the United States. We've gone through all of that. And so don't we need a little sympathy? Don't we need a little understanding? Don't we need a little affirmation? We want to come to church to hear that despite all of it, Jesus loves you. So don't worry about that. Biko said, no, don't do that. Tell them this is your situation. It is bad out there, and this is why it is. And one reason he says to Black preachers, one reason why it is what it is because you have connived. He talked about conniving with the church and with white people and with white supremacy. He says to the Black church, he says, you get on the pulpit and all you can talk about is our people drink too much and they do this too much, they do that too much. You don't even ask the question. They steal because they are poor. Because when you ask that question, it's a systemic question. Then it's no longer a question of do you love Jesus? It's a question of is there justice in society? And what form does your love for Jesus take? He calls Christianity the most effective instrument of the subjugation of our people. And then he says, but now in the Black church through Black preachers, Christianity still today remains that most effective instrument because of what he calls our interpretation of the Bible. So he doesn't throw away God, he doesn't throw away Jesus, he doesn't throw away the Bible. He says to us, it's your interpretation. In other words, what are you preaching? T.D. Jakes would be sent to hell by Steve Biko if he had heard him today. And that's what we should do. to these preachers who come to us with an individualistic, pro-capitalistic, new liberal capitalistic, nonsensical pop psychology theology, that's intent to make us feel good and never ask one single critical question about why we are in the situation that we are. And so this empowers us. It takes away, with that theology, they say it makes you feel good, but it really takes away the last bit of dignity that you still have. The dignity in you that white supremacy has tried to destroy. You come to the church to get affirmation of that dignity, and the affirmation of the dignity of God that is to fulfill the desire of God for justice in God's world. If you take that away, you take the meaning of life away. That's what those preachers and that kind of theology do. And so, so that is the self-critical and the critical element. And when you think like that, there is no room for personality cults. Then you ask critical questions of anybody. Then the criterion is not, can we vote for somebody because they're black like us? The question is whether their name is Barack Obama or Clyburn or Kamala Harris. The question is, where do they stand in the struggle for justice and freedom and dignity? Do they serve the purposes of the empire? And do they get the rewards of empire like we see every single day? And they throw their people away. Are they of those people who talk about a promised land, to quote now the title of a recent famous book? I am in the promised land. And so because I am in the promised land, you got to be in the promised land, but you're not. The vast majority of our people are not in a promised land. We are either stuck in Egypt still, or we are still struggling with the waters, because in the meantime, those waters have closed. We are drowning. Yeah. That dry land is no longer there, because we have told God, it's okay, let the waters come, we'll be fine, because we are on the side. That's what preachers do. And I think we see too little of a holy outrage against this kind of situation that leaves our people in. And personality cults is not by accident. Personality cults are cultivated as a distraction. Yeah. So Nelson Mandela is deified. In this book, Pharaohs on Both Sides of the Blood Red Waters, I have a whole chapter on the deification of Nelson Mandela. They make him into God. They talk of him as Jesus. There's this one guy who asked this painter, they paid him $2 million to have a painting, to do a painting of the Last Supper. And in the place of Jesus, in the middle of his disciples, says Nelson Mandela. Now, I mean, so the inculcation of this deified personality, which means I must just say thank you, Jesus, for Nelson Mandela, but I can't say thank you, Jesus, for Nelson Mandela, because Nelson Mandela is Jesus. So who do I thank? Oh, I mean, really, no. I mean, we have become so mesmerized with Mandela through this personality cult that we were completely embarrassed by Jesus. That's our dilemma in South Africa. And Black consciousness teaches us that's a distraction. The more I see Mandela as this deified, wonderful person who can do no wrong, the less I see what is happening with my people on the ground, and how the dominant classes have abused and used Mandela to manufacture contentment in my life so that the situation never changes for the vast majority of our people. It is a sinful situation in which we find ourselves. And personality cults are designed to distract us from the situation our people find ourselves in, and from the necessity of rising up in revolutionary solidarity with those people who have even less than we have. And so that is what makes Black consciousness so powerful and so relevant today in South Africa and in the United States, I should think.
My last question before I throw the open up to questions from Anna and the audience is how can interracial, and I'm drawing from the last chapter in Selfless Revolutionaries, how can interracial, intergenerational, intergender, interfaith, international collaborations operate so that we avoid what you call rainbow nationism, and advance the goal you addressed so forcefully in the final chapter of Selfless Revolutionary to bring down, and I like the way you put it, quote, bring down empire and all its workings, close quote.
Yes, thank you for that question again. Well, I mean, there is I talk about rainbow nationism to distinguish between what is a manufactured open and inclusive society and a real open and inclusive society. So that intergenerational, interracial, interclass movement that has become almost the hallmark of the Black Lives Matter movement in the United States. I mean, I sat with such deep gratitude and watch those crowds, and they come from everywhere, and it's young and old and white and black and everything in between, and they represent all of justice. And so you see the flag, the LGBTQI flag there. But it's not as if that is a separate issue. We're not talking silos here. Mm-hmm. We are talking people who have realized and come together that the entirety of empire is consolidated. Don't think that because the American empire is the American empire and they talk the way they do, they've got nothing to do with what Europe is doing to the rest of the world. They all pool their resources, they pool their ideological power, they pool their military power. That's why NATO did what NATO did to Libya, and what they do, and what they do to other countries in the world. And so they always come together. That is why the first people to defend races are other white races in power. They always find excuses. Oh, he didn't mean what he said. Oh, can't you take a joke? It's not really as serious as all of that. You are too sensitive. Don't talk about that because we are in a post-racial society. I will never forget a headline in a newspaper about one of the things that I said. It was either a speech or a sermon. It said, Boesak is stuck in apartheid. So I'm stuck in apartheid because I call out racism in South Africa today and in the world. I'm stuck in apartheid because I call out the insupportable inequalities socioeconomically. I am stuck in apartheid because I make mention of the fact that the vast wealth of South Africa belongs to 6 white families. I call out new liberal capitalism. I talk about the 1% and the 99%, and I talk about global apartheid. I talk about vaccine apartheid. I talk COVID apartheid, and Boesak can't get away from the word apartheid. No, it's because apartheid is still in place on a global scale. That's what we are dealing with. And so we are the only people who are divided. The empire is not divided. The empire allows America to take the lead because of clear reasons, politically, socioeconomically, and so on. Not because America is a better leader than anybody else. I mean, the leaders that America has just, I almost said a word, and let me not do that. But I mean, and they pick leaders like themselves. Look at the mess and the legacy that Trump left behind. Yeah. His fascism, his supremacy, his racism, his misogyny, all of that is duplicated in India,
Yes.
and it's in Hungary, and
Yes.
it is in Russia, and
And
it is now in Belarus, and it is in
Brazil.
Johnson of the UK. It is in Bolsonaro of
Yeah.
Brazil. It is everywhere, and where it isn't, Biden is still trying to bring it back. That's why Biden wants Venezuela to have regime change so that they can put in their puppet who thinks like them and who will further the aims of empire. That's what it's all about. And so my solidarity is with the people of Venezuela and with the people of Bolivia, who have been robbed of their president, who now is bringing it back again. And because our solidarity is so clear and so solid and so tangible and can be seen, that's why they have the courage. And I stand with the young people of Myanmar. And said, those people from the military who have done to you what they have done to you, we should find ways to let them understand you are not alone in the struggles. That's a global solidarity. We got to find ways to let the young people of Sudan know, great for you, we pray for you, God go with you, go and take on those bastards who think they can kill with impunity. That's where we are in the world today. And it is that kind of thing that I think we have to, and that solidarity is totally different from what I call rainbow nationalism, acting as if we are a post-racial, post-apartheid society. Color doesn't matter, color blindness, and then we say all of these things, and we come awake only when somebody says, "Oh no, but all lives matter." Then we realize what we've been doing all the time, and so sometimes it's too late. But I'm hoping and battling for that global solidarity, that prophetic oneness that is different than the pretend rainbow nation ideological ways in which we try to act as if the things that really cause pain and suffering and death don't really matter because they don't really exist. It's a figment of our imagination.
Thank you. Thank you. Sister Garbo, Sister Anna, I'm going to kick it to you for questions from our Zoom audience. Let me remind you, audience, that we're talking with Dr. Allan Boesak of South Africa, leading liberation theologian in the world, about his book, Selfless Revolutionaries. And the Zoom chat line is open. Please type your questions to Zoom. Or Sister Anna, do you have questions from the chat, or do you have other questions you want to add to those that I posed? I don't want to keep people from having input. I see a comment from Kim Reed to everyone on the chat. Reading Kim Reed's comment, your comment about the disillusion of the young in South Africa with systems and revered leaders, the pharaohs on both sides, connects for me with Dr. Frank Wilkerson's work on Afro-pessimism.
Yeah.
You want to comment about that, Dr. Boesak?
Yes, thank you for that. That's a very good comment, and it goes to two ways. There's the Afro-pessimism of the world, in which Africa can only be seen through the lens of pity and charity, and so Africa can never be seen as giving leadership.
Yeah.
Africa can never be seen as owning anything because we've been robbed of anything. But the African pessimism also connects with the fact that today Africa is still the continent with the most mineral resources in the world.
Yeah.
And why is it that our populations are still the poorest populations in the world? And that's not only because of imperialism and new colonialism and coloniality, and the way in which global capitalism works. Global capitalism works in Africa in that way because we have leaders and people who make themselves servants of that global capitalism who benefit from the exploitation of their own people. There's a young man in South Africa, and C.O. Kumalo, and I quote him in this book. He says, our leaders are like the Jerusalem elites who have made common cause with the Roman Empire in the exploitation and the killing of their own people. Yeah. Now, that's a young man in his early 30s who makes this judgment, and I think is absolutely right. So Africa's leaders have absolutely betrayed Africa's people, and it is up to us. So that's the pessimism that connects with the self-criticism. It's not the pessimism that the world pretends, and because Africa is not as bad as the world pretends we are, but as long as they can keep this Afro-pessimism alive, they can exploit whatever they want. They can do with us whatever they want, and we will never be able to come. I think of what I heard from a friend in Namibia. The European Union comes together. That's 27 of the richest nations in the world. They come together and they negotiate a trade deal with countries in Africa. But because the African Union has not yet got its act together to put things, to put the kind of unity forward economically and politically and otherwise that Europe has found. Now they come and they say, we're not talking with the African Union, we're talking to South Africa as a country on its own. We're talking to Zambia as a country on its own, and Mozambique as a country on its own. The guy from Namibia said to me, Doc, I was part of the Namibian delegation who met the European delegation to negotiate a trade deal. Now, this is about fishing, it's about minerals, about diamonds, it's about all sorts of things. Those Europeans come in there with a delegation of 180 experts. Namibia sits there with 28 people because they don't have anybody else. 28. Those white people is like a steamroller over us. And it's not because Africa is bad, but they want to keep Africa in that pessimistic thing so that they can do with us whatever they like. And so in a way, this is where imperialism, colonialism, and new colonialism have brought us. In another way, this is where our collaboration with new colonialism is keeping us. And we got to keep these two things clearly in mind. And we must not be forgiving of African leaders who do this to our people. We must be unforgiving of African leaders who make deals with capitalism outside and who have billions of dollars in their Swiss bank accounts or in their bank accounts in the Cayman Islands while their people die of hunger here. We must be unforgiving of African leaders who go to China and make deals with China and the Chinese say to them, oh, we will build a highway for you. We will build a building for you. And they get the building. What does China get in return? Mining licenses forever.
Yeah.
And that's because the guy who signs the contract gets $1 million or $2 million or $1 billion. And after he cannot steal any more elections, he then is finally thrown out, but then he retires with his billions. And our people are where our people were 100 and 200 and 300 years ago. So that is the kind of thing that Black consciousness helps us to see very, very clearly. And we are not forgiving of African leaders who allow that to happen to our people. And we must hold their feet to the fire. I will not say if holding their feet to the fire is not enough, throw them in the fire. But I will think of something similar.
I look forward to your next book on that subject, throwing them into the fire. Sister Garbo, you have some other questions or comments? I want to leave open opportunities for questions or comments from the Zoom audience? Sister Garbo or Sister Anna, you have questions or comments from the Zoom audience? Sister Garbo.
I don't think we have any questions in the chat, and our participants are able to unmute and ask questions if they like. I would just like to thank Dr. Boesak for writing Selfless Revolutionaries, and I'm encouraging all to read, and it is time for all of us to get our act together as a group. We are showing how to get this book at our bookstore and on our website, and to continue the conversation. My question is, Dr. Boesak, what's your next book? I know you got several coming. What is the next book we should read after we read Selfless Revolutionaries? Because we have to continue to encourage ourselves.
Sister Garbo, I haven't thought of the next book yet. It may be gestating somewhere deep in the recesses of my mind. Mostly when I finish with one book, I already am sort of thinking of something that is that's pinching me, that I have to think about. But I haven't been able to, and maybe it's because since Selfless Revolutionaries was finished, I was approached by a number of younger people here in South Africa, as I mentioned. But those conversations ended up in a request that I do a series of lectures online and in person. And we're doing those lectures since June. And next Saturday is the last of the 8 lectures. And it is about, and they said to me, talk to us about Black theology and its development and its power and its relevance through the lens of your own theological development. So through the lens of 50 years of my engagement with Black theology. And I must say, it has turned out to be an amazing experience for me. We are ending up next Saturday, but on the 4th of December, we have a special session with young people. At their request, they came to me. There was a young woman, the very first lecture in June, who got up and said, you are talking about things that I don't know anything about, that I don't hear anything about in my church. How is that possible? That I've grown up, as she says, and I'm so fed up, I've left Christianity, she said. I've walked away from the church. Today, for the first time, I am beginning to think, is there perhaps something in this thing that they call the Christian faith? So that young woman has now come to me and says, what if I bring a bunch of my friends and you spend some time with us? And the 4th of December is going to be that time. I am tickled to death that these young people are willing to take a Saturday afternoon or a Saturday morning out of their weekend to sit down with me and talk about these issues. What is going on in South Africa? What is going on in the world? What is my role in it? Can the Christian faith help us to do something about this? Can we be inspired again? Because there is no leadership in this country. There is chaos in so many ways. And so for me, having the opportunity to talk to those young people, even though she said to me, well, we have to do it during the day, she says, Doc, because it's Saturday. We're all going out in the evening, so don't keep us there too long. That's fine. But you see how exciting it is, and what these series of lectures have done. So maybe it's because my mind was totally on those series of lectures and getting them out of the way. And they will be published as 4 volumes in February next year. And we must perhaps talk about, we have a publisher in South Africa. We must perhaps talk about a co-publisher in the United States that can bring out those books. And volume 1 will be lecture 1 to 4. Volume 2 will be lecture 5 to 8. Volume 3 will be essays on topics like Christianity and fascism and the crisis of COVID and so forth and so forth. And then volume 4 is going to be sermons that I preached between 2010 and 2021. So these last 11 years. And they are going to be brought out in a book, in a box of these 4 volumes. Now, maybe when that is off my mind, I will probably be able to think whether I have the energy and enough thinking power left to think of another book, but we'll see.
Well, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us and for your writings and all of the encouragement that you give Reverend Griffen and the world. And we appreciate everything that you're doing. So Reverend Griffen, would you like to close us out and have the last word? And thank you so much for moderating this session.
Sister Garbo, again, thank you and Pyramid for hosting this book talk with Dr. Boesak. And thank you for making Selfless Revolutionaries available for order through Pyramid. Let me encourage the audience to order Selfless Revolutionaries through Pyramid. Tell people about Selfless Revolutionaries. This Zoom chat is just a teaser, but there is a screen on screen now to how to purchase Selfless Revolutionaries online. There's a link to the Pyramid link on the web. You can get copies of Selfless Revolutionaries and in the store at 1001 Wright Avenue in the Dunbar neighborhood. You can get curbside pickup for Selfless Revolutionaries. You do not want to miss this book. I will confess to you that I am an Allan Boesak junkie, okay? And I am addicted to his work. I have got that. If you get Selfless Revolutionaries, you also don't want to miss any of his other books. I want to tell you, I just got my copy of Children of the Waters of Meribah, which is Black Liberation Theology, the Merovingian Tradition and the Challenges of 21st Century Empire. Dr. Boesak, I want to put in a request in a couple of months after the holidays to get you for a book talk about that one, because I want to have a conversation about that one. Man, you just keep writing prolifically, and you keep prodding me to think in the middle of the ocean. And thank you very much. I want to thank you, audience, for viewing this book talk. And I want to at the same time challenge you. Please remember something that George Haley, the brother of Alex Haley, who wrote Roots, and who wrote the autobiography of Malcolm X. George Haley was a Black lawyer who attended law school, one of the first Black graduates of the University of Arkansas School of Law. And when I was a law student, George Haley came and spoke to the law school and quoted something that Dr. Benjamin Mays of Morehouse would speak to the Morehouse men. Morehouse was a men's school, of course, like Spelman is a women's school, and in Atlanta. And Dr. Mays often used this quote that George Haley shared with us that has not left me. The quote is, "Train your mind to think. For the man who outthinks you," he said man, I'll say person, "the person who outthinks you rules you." Yeah. And I would contend that we cannot be outthought if we outread those who want to rule us. Only people who refuse to read will be outthought, because people who rule usually are readers. Yeah. And they have reasoned through letters how to rule and collaborate with other reasoned people and use the process of communication in all their various media to get this empire notion going. So please patronize Pyramid. Please read Black consciousness literature. Please read Selfless Revolutionaries. Please read, and please encourage people to use platforms like Zoom and other platforms to invite authors to have conversations about Black consciousness and issues of justice and empire and Black theology, so that we think, rethink, and unthink in order to be people who are really radical revolutionaries in the complete sense, not in the incomplete sense, but in the complete sense, where we're constantly thinking and rethinking and unthinking so as to be critical and self-critical people of revolution and liberation in this neo-capitalist, neoliberal, neo-fundamentalist, neo-fascist kind of age of empire in which we live. On behalf of New Millennium Church and the welcoming, inclusive, prophetic followers of Jesus at New Millennium Church, I want to thank you, Dr. Allan Boesak, for sharing of yourself so graciously. I want to give you a chance to give a 2-minute closing speech, and I'm going to close us out.
No, I'm not going to make a speech. Thank you, Judge Griffen. My friend Wendell, thank you so much to Pyramid for giving me the opportunity to talk about this book and for so enthusiastically encouraging others to get it and to read it. I really deeply appreciate that. It's wonderful for me to be connected again with the New Millennium Church people and with the circle, the wider circle that you've connected me tonight. Let us pray for one another. The struggles continue, but Arundhatu Roy of India, and I quote that in the book. Let me read that to you what she says. Because it is such a beautiful quote. She says, we have each in our own way laid siege to empire. We may not have stopped it in its tracks yet, but we have stripped it down. We have made it drop its mask, as we have seen this week. It looks like a loss, but we have made empire drop its mask. We have forced it into the open. It now stands before us on the world stage in all its brutish, iniquitous nakedness, too ugly to behold its own reflection. And then she says to us, but keep on thinking, keep on fighting, and keep on creating moments of silence, because she says, another world is not only possible, she is on her way, and on a quiet day, I can hear her breathing. That's what keeps me going. And I pray to God that that will keep you going as we continue here. So thank you for your support tonight. Thank you for this wonderful conversation. And thank you for having me as your guest.
God bless you, Dr. Boesak. Sister Garbo, close us out. Thank you very much again.
Thank you.
I believe Ms. Hearn might have stepped away for a moment, but I will step in and just reiterate once again how appreciative we are for everybody's time, that you've honored us with your Saturday when you could be anywhere else. You've chosen to be here in conversation with these two wonderful gentlemen. I hope everybody has a blessed remainder of their day, and thank you once again.
Thank you.
God bless you all.
Good
Happy
night.
Thanksgiving.
Thank you. Thank you. Good.
Fight on.